Welcome to part 4 of Disabilities, Diversity, and Inclusion. What can I do about ableism? This is the final part of a 4-part program designed to introduce parents, caregivers, providers, and people with disabilities to the concept of ableism. After completing this program, you will not only be able to recognize ableism, you will also be able to apply what you have learned to dismantle it. Before we begin, I'd like to review these 2 content notes. First, this program contains references to ableism and some offensive language. This information is included for the purposes of educating others on the harm caused by ableism. Second, this presentation uses both person-first and identity-first language interchangeably, since either may be used depending on individual preference. When interacting with people with disabilities, it's important to consider their individual preferences first. As you may recall from part 1, we'll use 4 questions to guide us on our study of ableism, including: what is ableism? Why does it matter? What does ableism look like? And what can we do about it? Part 1 looked at the question, what is ableism, by offering you some definitions, a framework for how ableism appears in our thoughts and our actions, and some history and models that are commonly used to explain ableist behavior. In part 2, we explored the different groups impacted by ableism and saw how ableism impacts not only people with disabilities, but also our communities at large. We looked at a few case examples where individuals and families experienced ableism. Part 3 took a deeper dive into what ableism looks like. In part 4, we'll identify 3 steps that can help us to dismantle ableism. Let's get started. If this program has convinced you that it's time to do something about ableism, I'm glad you stuck around. This final section is designed to empower you to take the next steps. Before we get started, it's important to keep in mind that this is a process. In section 1, we talked about how ableism is an ideological belief. Ideological beliefs take time to become part of our culture, and they also take time to dismantle. There will be mess-ups and times that we say or do something that comes from the bias of ableism. The best thing we can do when this happens is to stop, acknowledge the mistake or apologize, and move forward with the learning process. The action steps in this section are based on the National Association for Social Work's Anti-Oppression Informed Practice competency, which charges individuals to situate in an understanding of history and culture, be critical of systems and power, and prioritize relationships and mutual transformation. By practicing and becoming aware, reflecting on privilege and power, and listening, we can improve our own capabilities to dismantle ableism. Much of this program has been shaped to give you a head start on the first step. We discussed the historical and social contexts of ableism and models of disability. We also looked at how ableism not only impacts people with disabilities, but also our communities at large, and some of the ways that ableism manifests in both actions and words. But we've only explored the generalizations to get through step 1. We must challenge ourselves to do more. Begin by looking at your own experiences. By exploring your own experiences with disability, you can position yourself to begin learning about others as well. Consider questions such as, how did you understand disability when you were growing up? What expectations did you have about disability, and where do you think they came from? What emotions do you have when you think about the word disability? Do you have any friends or family members who are disabled? What's your relationship with them like? If you have a friend or family member with a disability, what surprised you about that person? Why do you think it was surprising? If you have the opportunity to take the disability IAT, this can also provide valuable insight to your exploration. The link to the IAT was included in previous section. As you explore, it's possible that you'll discover some of the things that you don't like about yourself. Give yourself space to sit with any guilt and unpack those feelings. You can also talk to someone you trust, like a counselor or clergy person. It's important to remember that our modern society did not create ableism. We inherited it. In her 2019 presentation to the YWCA of Greater Cleveland, Robin DiAngelo spoke against past oppressions against Black Americans, saying, I do not feel guilty about that because I know that I did not choose to be socialized in this way, but I am responsible for changing the way we go forward. This wisdom applies equally to guilt that we feel over how our culture has treated people with disabilities. Choosing to prioritize responsibility over guilt can be empowering and give you momentum to keep doing this work. Our brief look at history in Section 1 demonstrated that people with disabilities have been consistently marginalized in American society. Policies, practices, and laws prioritize non-disabled people's access to resources and power are common. In another cartoon example by Michael Giangreco and Kevin Ruel, students are shown asking why George, a classmate who uses a wheelchair, is always behind the group when they go places. What the students have failed to consider is that the location of their school, aptly named Hillview for its position on a hill, privileges them to go ahead of their classmate. George, on the other hand, must wait for assistance from the teacher in order to get the same access as his peers, presumably because he's unable to control his ascent or descent on the hill. How would George's experience be different if the school was at the bottom of the hill, or if a wheelchair-accessible bus was available to transport all the students at once? When we ask critical questions, we position ourselves to understand elements of privilege and power. With a better understanding of privilege and power, we can also be better positioned to act against them. Here's another example to help you think about privilege. This story, published by Disability Scoop, discusses new legislation targeted at ending waitlists for people with disabilities who need community-based support. The photo chosen to headline the story shows a mother wiping her disabled daughter's face before they leave their home. Well, arguably, the mother's act is one of love. The daughter looks uncomfortable and vulnerable. Let's reflect on it together. If you didn't see the headline, what would you say that this photo is trying to communicate? Who has the power in this photo? Who doesn't? Why do you think the editors chose this photo to tell their story? The final step in empowering ourselves to be anti-ableist is to listen to people with disabilities. When we develop mutually beneficial relationships with people who are different from ourselves, we not only develop empathy and compassion, we can also learn more about what it's like to experience the world from their point of view. If you are a parent or caregiver to someone with a disability, start at home with your loved one. What does the person love? What's important to them? What frustrates him or her? How does your loved one communicate these feelings? Words, behavior, both? What does the person like most about themselves? What do they dislike? What would they change about you? Listening to conversations of adults in the disability community can help empower anti-ableist action. It would be impossible to list all the disabled adults who are working towards a more inclusive future, but I'd like to get you started with a few of my favorite voices. We'll begin with Kia Brown, an author and creator of the Disabled and Cute hashtag. She's passionate about representation and opportunities for people with disabilities. Brown's story shares how she learned to love herself despite having a body that wasn't in the same category as our cultural definitions of beauty. We've already mentioned Lawrence Carter Long when we discussed disability and language in part 3 of this program. Carter Long is a lifelong disability activist who has worked in a number of areas, including representation, disability rights, and disability in media. Rebecca Coakley is a disability activist and speaker with a long history of disability policy activism. Coakley's work in policy has helped improve access and inclusion for many Americans with disabilities. Haben Girma is a disability rights lawyer, author, and public speaker. One of her major areas of activism is improving access to technology for people with disabilities. Erica Moans is a freelance writer for Pop Sugar and a staff writer for Cripple magazine, who's particularly interested in disability and mental health. She has a podcast called No Standing Ovations Please, where she discusses disability and mental health issues. Melissa Thompson is a social worker whose activism interests focused on the experiences of Black women with disabilities. She created the Disability to White viral hashtag in 2016 that addressed the lack of diversity in the disability community and how a lack of representation impacts disabled people of color and their ability to feel fully included and accepted within the disability community. Alice Wong is a disability activist and creator of the Disability Visibility Project, which encourages people with disabilities to tell their stories and to be part of the global community. This site offers a large collection of interviews where you can listen to even more disabled voices than the ones listed in this program. Wong has also edited 2 collections of essays from disabled writers. So this is it. We've reached the end of the road and positioned ourselves at the beginning of another. You now have the tools to understand how ableism took root in America and see how it impacts not only people with disabilities, but also the larger community. You saw some examples of ableism, and while the list is far from complete, I hope they help you to be more critical of different interactions and look at how ableism can creep into both our actions and our words. Finally, you explored 3 steps that can help you become a better self-advocate or ally to people with disabilities. I appreciate your joining me on this journey and hope to meet you again on the path forward. Before we go, I'd like once again to thank some of the talented individuals who helped make this program a reality. Thank you to Charisse Montgomery for your valuable insights into the experiences of Black Americans with disabilities. Sarah Intimaki has helped support this project from the beginning with overwhelming encouragement and with her insights into the experiences of families with disabled minor children. Finally, Lisa Ruman contributed to this project through an extension of her supervision work and by helping me include systems of empowerment and approaches consistent with social work values. I'm deeply grateful to each of you for your support.